Continuing coverage of strike on Iraq, Wolf Blitzer Reports starts right now.
Under fire today, a massive aerial assault is ongoing, and the worst of it may be ahead. Here's also a live picture of Kuwait City. Iraq has fired back, but not with the same intensity or success. Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer in Kuwait City, where we're tracking an air and ground campaign led by U.S. forces. The British government has just released Prime Minister Tony Blair's statement to the British people on why he ordered British troops to take part in the war. Here's what Tony Blair said.
Tonight, British servicemen and women are engaged from air, land and sea. Their mission? To remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction. I know this course of action has produced deep divisions of opinion in our country. But I know also the British people will now be united in sending our armed forces our thoughts and prayers. They are the finest in the world, and their families and all of Britain can have great pride in them. The threat to Britain today is not that of my father's generation. War between the big powers is unlikely. Europe is at peace. The Cold War already a memory. But this new world faces a new threat of disorder and chaos, born either of brutal states like Iraq, armed with weapons of mass destruction, or of extreme terrorist groups. Both hate our way of life, our freedom, our democracy. My fear, deeply held, based in part on the intelligence that I see, is that these threats come together and deliver catastrophe to our country and our world. These tyrannical states do not care for the sanctity of human life. The terrorists delight in destroying it. Some say if we act, we become a target. The truth is, all nations are targets. Bali was never in the front line of action against terrorism. America didn't attack Al-Qaeda. They attacked America. Britain has never been a nation to hide at the back, but even if we were, it wouldn't avail us. Should terrorists obtain these weapons, now being manufactured and traded around the world, the carnage they could inflict to our economies, our security, to world peace, would be beyond our most vivid imagination. My judgment as Prime Minister is that this threat is real, growing, and of an entirely different nature to any conventional threat to our security that Britain has faced before.
The British Prime Minister Tony Blair speaking to the British people now that British forces are substantially involved in fighting in southern Iraq. We had heard earlier from our Christian Amanpour, the British forces now moving into the El Fa Peninsula in southern Iraq from positions in northern Kuwait. I want to show our viewers some pictures earlier tonight, pictures of Baghdad. Listen to this.
هذه ألسنة النيران تتصاعد السلطات العراقية لمواجهة تلك الهجمات الأمريكية المتكررة ولكن بالتأكيد أن كل من هذه
You can see the fires of these buildings, these government buildings in downtown Baghdad from earlier. U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles fired at significant targets in Baghdad. Our senior international correspondent Nick Robertson is standing by as he has throughout our coverage. Nick, talk to our viewers. Tell us what's happened in Baghdad tonight.
Wolf, early in the evening, a couple of hours after it got dark here, the air raid sirens went off. There were some distant detonations. Then a lot of anti-aircraft gunfire. The anti-aircraft gunfire originally on the periphery of the city. Then multiple eruptions from different anti-aircraft positions in the city. Then as we were watching not far from our location, several buildings within a mile of where we were hit, at least one building hit by at least two missiles. Impossible to say for us from our position if they were bombs or cruise missiles. That building, then the big ball of red flame and smoke erupted around the side of the building. That building still smoking. The other buildings close to our location that were hit, they have stopped smoking now. The city at this time very quiet. The all clear was given here perhaps about an hour ago. Iraqi television here has been reporting, it says 72 cruise missiles fired at the city. They say many of those missiles failed. They also say that the enemy has tried to violate the borders in the south and west of Iraq. And the news broadcast went on to say that Iraq has confronted the enemy in those areas. They also say that Iraq has fired 2 missiles into Kuwait, one to a port and one into another area of Kuwait. They also say that there are 4 martyrs here today. 4 people have died and 1 officer has died as well. And they report 5 other, apparently military people, also injured, Wolf.
All right, Nick, I want to get back to you, but I want to bring in CNN's Walter Rogers. He's in the northern part of Kuwait along the border with Iraq, where there's significant military action unfolding right now. Walter, tell our viewers what's going on.
Wolf, the U.S. Army 7th Cavalry has had its first hostile contact with the Iraqis on the other side of the border. Now, it's not described as a large action, but it is described as hostile contact, and an Army source told CNN that a number of vehicles of the Iraqi Army were taken out. The numbers I can't be precise upon, but there were apparently some Iraqi trucks and perhaps some Iraqi tanks and Iraqi BMPs, that is, armored personnel carriers. The first hostile contact the Army has had has been by its scouting unit, the 7th Cavalry. That has slowed the progress somewhat here, but the push through is continued in a short while. Actually, the Army accelerated its timetable to move towards Iraq, accelerated it because the Iraqis fired at least half a dozen tactical ballistic missiles in the direction of U.S. troops in Kuwait earlier in the day. That being the case, the Army began moving forward a number of hours ago. That progress has moved somewhat, has been slowed somewhat, however, because of the first hostile contact the 7th Cavalry has had with Iraqi forces on the other side. Wolf?
Walter, earlier today we saw U.S. troops with you dressed in full battle gear, not only battle gear, but chemical and biological protective gear as well. Are they still dressed along those lines?
Wolf, I'm standing here wearing the Army's CBW suit, Chemical Biological Warfare suit. When these soldiers were ordered into their Bradley fighting vehicles this evening and into their tanks and in every other vehicle which is traveling with this unit, we were told to go to MOP 1, which is to say, put on your chemical weapons suits. We've done that. We do not need to wear our gas masks at this point. That MOP alert could be upgraded at any point, but every soldier here is at this point wearing his chemical weapons suit. Additionally, those in the armored vehicles are wearing what are called NOMACs. Those are fire retardant uniforms that the tankers and the men in the other fighting vehicles wear in case the vehicle is hit. The soldiers call those things their fireproof pajamas. Wolf?
Walter Rogers, he's here in Kuwait along the border with Iraq. You saw a video phone picture of him. It's after 1 a.m. here in this part of the world, not very far away from Walter is Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN's medical correspondent. He's also embedded with U.S. troops. Sanjay, tell us what you're seeing and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, well, just past 1 o'clock in the morning here in the northern desert of Kuwait, sort of bright moon out here as well. Behind me is a bunker, and this is where most of the Marines here at Camp Iwo Jima have spent most of their day. Of course, that's not the kind of day that they were expecting. It started off like any other day for the Marines at Camp Iwo Jima. Many were glued to the television, hearing for the first time of the attacks in Baghdad. At 10:28 a.m. local time, everything changed. An object traveling very fast, about 300 feet above the ground, made the unmistakable sound of a missile. It caused Marines to scurry for cover. Another familiar sound was then heard. Bunker, bunker, bunker. Gas, gas, gas. This time, it was for real. This was no drill. Marines quickly grabbed their Kevlar, helmets, and gas masks and sprinted towards the nearest bunker. Packed tight, shoulder to shoulder, it was hot and hard to breathe.
This is the fourth bunker call in as many hours. As you can see, we're wearing our masks, our Kevlar, and our helmets. That's because we were instructed to do so, as we were instructed also to be here in this bunker. We have seen missiles flying overhead. We have heard thuds all around us. We have heard sirens as well. Who knows what's next?
It is fair to say everyone is anxious, tired, frustrated, but remain confident. For now, I'm writing this piece by flashlight, and our team is setting up in the dark, as close to the bunker as we can. Yeah, and another thing, Wolf, even since that time, there has been another bunker call. We've heard the sirens go off continuously. There are trucks set up right around the perimeter of the base here. There are trucks to basically continuously monitor the air. If they detect even the slightest abnormality, then everyone, basically these alarms go off. Wolf, even as we're doing this live shot, they have just shouted bunker, bunker, bunker. Marines are starting to come to this bunker. You'll see them here in just a few seconds. They're going to have their helmets on. They're going to have their Kevlar. This is the 10th bunker call really since 10 o'clock this morning. Wolf?
Well, what about the earlier fears, Sanjay, of chemical or biological agents in the air over where you are, resulting in you guys putting on those gas masks? Were those false alarms?
It appears at this time that they were false alarms. Again, these particular trucks that monitor the air are designed to be very sensitive, and a lot of different things that they can trigger them besides chemical themselves. Even particulate matter in the air from the dust, from the silicon, things like that can possibly trigger them. They're designed to be very sensitive, perhaps not as specific, but they have been going off continuously, Wolf. Like I said, we're just hearing it right now as well. There's a siren.
Well, it's funny you say you're hearing it.
There's a siren basically talking about the specific chemical thing. Who knows if it's a false alarm? Who knows if it's a real thing? You can hear the sirens, the horns going off. No, Wolf, we're going to go put our stuff on as well and jump into that bunker. Wolf?
All right, Sanjay, we're hearing sirens here in Kuwait City as well, presumably precaution because of where you are. This is the 6th time today here in Kuwait City. The sirens that you might be hearing behind me are going off. We're going to continue to monitor precisely what's happening here in Kuwait City. But as I speak to you right now, sirens for the 6th time today going off in Kuwait City. We'll continue to check out, see what the issue is here in Kuwait City. We'll follow up with Dr. Sanjay Gupta in northern Kuwait as well. In the meantime, let's go over to our senior Pentagon correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, tell us what the latest assessment is at the Pentagon about the military operation.
Well, Wolf, the so-called shock and awe campaign apparently has been put on hold while the Pentagon assesses the state of Iraqi leadership, how much of a hold Saddam Hussein has on power. The question is anyone in charge of the Iraqi military at this point? Is anyone communicating with troops in the field? Because the evidence is at this point is that there's been a very weak organized response to the strikes that have taken part so far. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld today said that the Pentagon has been in communication with people in the Iraqi military at various levels, including the Republican Guard units, and that they're going to become, he said, increasingly aware that Saddam Hussein is going to be gone very soon.
This is not a war against a people. It is not a war against a country. It is most certainly not a war against a religion. It is a war against a regime.
It is a fluid situation.
Now, all indications are that the strike last night against a leadership target in Baghdad was an area that U.S. intelligence believed that Saddam Hussein might be, along with his 2 sons, Uday and Qusay. The U.S. is still not 100% sure that that was Saddam Hussein on that tape last night. There were about 39 cruise missiles fired from 6 ships in yesterday's strike, and then today another round of cruise missiles produced some fires at government buildings in downtown Baghdad. We're told more than 20 cruise missiles fired from ships today, including 2 British submarines. Also, in all the action that's going on in the fog of war, there was an incident today in which an Apache attack helicopter had to make a hard landing in southern Iraq. We're told that the crew was able to repair the helicopter, or at least get it back up in the air. There was some gunfire in the area. It's unclear, though, whether that gunfire from the ground played any role in the helicopter going down. In any event, the helicopter was able to fly out on its own speed and get back to safety. Wolf?
More of the psychological campaign
Jamie, as you were speaking, the sirens have stopped wailing here in Kuwait City. Our viewers are seeing a live picture of Kuwait City. The sirens had gone off for a couple minutes. Once again, the 6th time today, presumably a precaution of because of what's going on in the northern part of this country, a good 100 kilometers north of here, about 60 miles or so north of where I am. The sirens are now off here in Kuwait City, the 6th time they went on today. Jamie, let's get to some of the issues that you raised in your report. The most important one, the full fury of the U.S. British military, the coalition, not yet being unveiled. That's going to wait, the shock and awe campaign. Presumably what they're trying to do, correct me if I'm wrong, is begin to rattle the top Iraqi leadership?
Yeah, and actually they're trying to see now what effect they've had before they proceed. You know, the war plan called originally for a very vigorous start of the campaign, but because it started the way it did with these targets of opportunity, and the question now about whether there's a real effective command structure in Iraq, the U.S. Doesn't want to rush into a campaign that would level a lot of Baghdad if it's possible that the Iraqi regime is crumbling. Now, I said it's basically on hold, but it may not be on hold for that long. That's part of the psychological warfare. Iraqi military, excuse me, the Iraqi military and the Iraqi regime doesn't know when the U.S. might unleash that series of punishing airstrikes. Wolf?
Jamie, we're getting the all clear over here, the siren going off. This is the 6th time that siren going off. Now an all clear, single monotone blast indicating that any threat to Kuwait City has now gone away. You're looking at live pictures of Kuwait City. It's now, about almost 20 after 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 a.m. here in Kuwait City. We'll continue, of course, to monitor what's going on. Jamie, stand by, JB. I want to go back to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, our medical correspondent. He's embedded with U.S. troops in northern Kuwait. He's actually getting ready. We'll get back to him in a moment, but let's go over to the White House, our senior White House correspondent, John King. We heard from the president earlier today, John.
We did, Wolf. Much of the president's day spent behind the scenes. We are told he has been in the Oval Office most of the day, working the telephones, calling several world leaders, also calling the Speaker of the House, Denny Hastert, to give him an update on the war campaign so far. We are told the president is quite satisfied with the progress, quite happy with the reports he is getting from senior military officials and Pentagon leaders. Mr. Bush did make one public appearance, though, a message to the American people that their government is up and running, even as the war is being prosecuted, and a message as well to those around the world who say this operation lacks international support.
Call my cabinet together to review our strategies to make the world more peaceful, to make our country more secure, to make the lives of our citizens as healthy and as prosperous as possible. We heard from Secretary Rumsfeld, who briefed us on the early stages of the war. There's no question we've set the finest of our citizens into harm's way. They perform with great skill and great bravery. We thank them. We thank their loved ones. We appreciate their sacrifice. We heard from Secretary Powell, who briefed us on the ever-growing coalition of the willing, nations who support our deep desire for peace and freedom. Over 40 nations now support our efforts. We are grateful for their determination. We appreciate their vision, and we welcome their support. As well, we discussed the need to make sure we have plans in place to encourage economic vitality and growth. We will continue to push for a Medicare system that is compassionate for our seniors. We care deeply about the fact that some children in our society can't read. We want the best of education for every citizen in America. This cabinet is confident about the future of our country. We're confident we can achieve our objectives. I'm grateful for their service to their country. Thank you all.
In suggesting this is a broad and robust coalition, the president trying to counter criticism from France, from Russia, from the United Nations that he and Great Britain essentially are off on a rogue adventure without the sanctioning of the international community. The White House says that is not the case. I want to show you quickly now a behind-the-scenes look of the president's first big briefing this morning in the Oval Office. The CIA Director George Tenet coming into the room. You see him in the blue shirt there. Vice President Cheney with his back to the camera. White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card. We are told at this meeting in the morning, the CIA Director George Tenet telling the president and the vice president about the strikes last night, also his assessment of the threat of terrorism here in the United States. Again, Wolf, the president behind the scenes most of the day. He's having dinner with a visiting foreign leader tonight, the president of Cameroon. We are told by senior administration officials the president quite happy with the progress reports he is getting so far, and he is reaching out to world leaders. We are told to probably expect the president to speak again tomorrow, but that depends on the developments overnight. Wolf?
John King will be getting back to you at the White House. John, thanks very much. Jane Arath is standing by right now. She's in northern Iraq, not far from the Turkish border. Jane, what's happening where you are?
Well, a lot of expectations here, Wolf, with that Turkish parliament approval of two things: the use of the Turkish airspace by the American military. We're expecting, and local officials are expecting, American troops to be landing at airstrips in northern Iraq for a possible scaled-down northern front assault on Iraqi forces. The other thing is the possibility that there could actually be Turkish troops in northern Iraq following that parliament decision. Now, as expected, Kurdish leaders are not taking that very kindly. They are still saying that it's totally unnecessary and warning that there could be very severe problems if Turkish forces come into that border area where they have ranged thousands of their own fighters along the border. Now, we're also seeing what officials say is almost a full-blown humanitarian crisis here. We're in the city of Dohuk, which has been emptied like many other cities in northern Iraq. People fleeing into the countryside and into the mountains, fearing Iraqi forces and what they say could be a possible chemical attack. Now, if you drive out of the city, you'll see tens of thousands of people who are living out in the countryside and hundreds of families who are huddled in tents, in some cases just thin sheets of plastic. Now, there's been freezing rain. They're up to their knees in mud practically. They're trying to warm their hands with fires, and they're getting water from streams. They're living in very dire conditions. Local authorities are starting to build tent cities for them. They're appealing to them to return to their homes, saying it's safe, but not very many people are listening. Wolf?
Jane Arath, thanks very much for that report. Jane Arath in northern Iraq, not far from the Turkish border. We'll see what's happening on that front. CNN's Miles O'Brien is standing by at the CNN Center in Atlanta for some more big board analysis on what's going on the battlefield. Miles?
Wolf, I'm joined by the former NATO Supreme Commander, Wes Clark, who's going to walk us through a couple of things. First of all, we're going to take a big picture look at the, well, I guess you could call it a minuet that involves these hundreds of aircraft as they kind of converge over the airspace and begin an assault like this. It really is an interesting thing as we look at some animation produced by our friends at Analytical Graphics and we zoom in. I just want to point out these blue circles are generally the radars which emanate from friendlies, the term is. That's to say AWACS. How important are those AWACS aircraft as you're coordinating these battles, General Clark?
Well, they're critical because that's how you keep track of what's in the air. That's the way you time it and sequence the flights in. And they're also detecting, of course, the enemy forces, so they would vector you in if you needed help to find the enemy.
All right, there's your AWACS right there, and it has about a 300-mile radius, I think, around it.
That's right.
Controls, there are literally air traffic controllers in there. And as we kind of fly through this, you notice it kind of turns kind of pink. That means you're being painted, that's the term, or read by an enemy radar. And one of the first things you do if you're coordinating a battle like this is you take out those radar sites, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Now, one of the other things that's involved in all this, of course, is stealth technology, because before those radars are, the eyes are poked out of them, what you want to do is use, if you can, something that is not seen by radar. The B-2 aircraft is something that is in play here, deployed for the first time outside of Missouri, in this case Diego Garcia, running up through the Persian Gulf. The B-2 has the capability of delivering a couple of laser-guided weapons, these so-called mini bunker busters. And as they come in, they're not the fastest aircraft in the fleet, but they also have the ability to be more or less invisible to radar. Are they really invisible?
No, they're not really invisible. So what we like to do is we want to have some jammers up there with them. We want to take out those radars early on. Plus, we know that when they get up closer, they're liable to be seen. So we want everything in our favor before we put the B-2s up.
All right, and let's look real quickly at the EA-6B Prowler, which does that jamming. And that's exactly what happened in this case. The Pentagon telling us that the EA-6B, which does, in fact, create this kind of jamming signal and can create false targets on radars, is involved, sort of the belt and suspenders technique, if you will. Now let's look at the map here, and I want to ask you this shock and awe we have been talking about. Announcement from the Pentagon that it's been suspended. Potentially really good news embedded in that announcement.
Absolutely, because if we've taken out his command and control, they're ready to fall off. The apples are going to fall off the tree. All we have to do is pick them up. And it's just a matter of finding someone in there who can tell the Iraqi military to lay down their weapons, move off to the side of the road. We'll drive up there, get those weapons of mass destruction, and this thing will be over.
All right, but there's been a tremendous potential power vacuum there. There could be a lot of confusion and who knows what if there was a real decapitation of this regime.
If there was, I mean, it's possible that some other leader would emerge who would be just as hostile and say, this is my chance to grab for power, and I don't think the United States could do this, and therefore we're going to fight. But I think that's unlikely. I think that given all the buildup to this, that if we really did decapitate that regime, the people who are next in line are going to go to any relative's home and stay off the telephone, stay off the radio, not give orders, and hope that this thing goes away very quickly.
Interesting. Now let's talk a little bit to that end, some of the targets that we know about just from seeing cameras in the city of Baghdad, some of them unmanned because of the way we've position our crews to get them out of harm's way. For example, our crews are operating at the Ministry of Information, which is a very desirable target if you're planning out this situation. Of course, it hasn't been struck yet because we still have a camera there, but nevertheless, we didn't want our people there. Now, as we zoom in on Baghdad, let's take you, and what I'll do is I'll show you kind of let's get in one step closer, Dave, and get in there, and we'll give you a sense of some of the key areas that we know were struck on this day of strikes. And what I want to point out to you is, first of all, that is the mother of all Saddam Hussein palaces there, the Republican Guard Palace. Up here is a facility, a building that is used by Tariq Aziz, the Deputy Prime Minister. Over in this area is the hotel where Nick Robertson has been giving us our reports, kind of a field of view of that. Let's get closer very quickly, and I want to just give you one example of what we're talking about here. As you look at this office building, take a look at this image, of course, from our friends at earthviewer.com, Digital Globe, shot a year or so ago. Take a look at the images that we received here at CNN Center earlier in this day of this same building. It's quite clear from this night vision imagery that it has sustained a rather significant hit, and as we said, this is a key place for some of the Iraqi leadership. General Clark, these are regime targets, which means the U.S. is not going after power plants, dams, anything that would cause undue hardship on the civilian population, correct?
That's right. These are targets that are associated with control of the country and control of the armed forces.
And if you succeed, it can be
just like the decapitating strike. I mean, you're going to take out his communications, his files, his record keeping, and all the means he's got to maintain the reign of terror in Iraq.
General Wes Clark, we appreciate your insights. Thanks very much. Wolf.
Thank you very much, Miles O'Brien at the CNN Center and General Clark. I want to go right to this videotape, tell our viewers what we're about to see. CNN's Walter Rogers, he's embedded with U.S. troops in the northern part of this country, the northern part of Kuwait. He was videotaping a stand-up, and I want you to take a look and see what happened as he was videotaping this stand-up, what happened in the middle of his report.
A U.S. Army source has told CNN that the U.S. Army 7th Cavalry has had its first hostile contact with the Iraqi forces on the other side of the border. They are describing it as relatively low-key, according to reports which we're receiving now, and these reports are somewhat conflicting. A number of Iraqi vehicles were taken out, including perhaps a number of tanks. That has slowed the U.S. Army 7th Cavalry's progress across the border into Iraq. We just heard an intel. What the hell? No, I don't know what it is. Can you hear me? Atlanta, we just heard something shooting.
All right, that was Walter Rogers preparing a report on videotape. He was feeding it into Atlanta. Walter Rogers joining us on the phone right now. Tell our viewers what that explosion was that you heard, Walter, as you were preparing that report.
Our best guess, Wolf, is that was indeed an incoming shell. Judging by the sound of it, it was high explosive. It was a single incoming artillery shell. We are guessing at this point. The reason we're guessing that it was not friendly fire by any stretch of the imagination is because the 7th.
Walter, I assume everyone is okay. Is that right?
Everyone's, yeah, sure, we're fine. You know, there was a little concussion, which you get with artillery stuff, but it wasn't anywhere near close enough to do anyone any damage that we're aware of.
How are the young soldiers you're with dealing with these incoming artillery shells, with the fears of Scud missiles, Frog missiles? What's the mood where you are, Walter?
Wolf, can you repeat the question? We're moving, and it's a little difficult to hear you. Try again, please.
All right, Walter, let me try again. I'm wondering how the young soldiers that you're with are dealing with these scares that you're facing up in the northern part of Kuwait along the border with Iraq.
Well, you can imagine their adrenaline is pumping, but then again, many of these young soldiers joined the Army, as they say, because they wanted to get into a fight. And every one of them, of course, you can, as I say, is excited when they hear the sound of an incoming shell. It puts them on a very taut edge. Having said that, that has not deterred our movement at all. We're still moving forward. Wolf?
And Walter, I know you're like me, a veteran journalist. How are you coping?
Me? Oh, I've heard so much artillery before. It was, you know, it's no big deal, okay?
Famous words from Walter Rogers, no big deal. Clearly it is a big deal, but Walter Rogers, one of the best in the business. Thanks very much, Walter, for that report. Take care of yourself. Let's check in with CNN's Connie Chung at the CNN Center in Atlanta. She's going to tell us what's happening right now. Connie?
In the strike. Thank you, Wolf. Here's what's happening in the strike on Iraq at this hour. Battle on the border. Soldiers from the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry Regiment clashed with Iraqi troops across the Kuwaiti border tonight. Army sources tell CNN the Americans destroyed a number of Iraqi military vehicles. Britain's embattled Prime Minister Tony Blair has just told his nation that its forces are now engaged by air, land, and sea. In a televised address, Mr. Blair said he's confident that the British people divided over war will unite behind their military. Baghdad has been hit for a second straight night as the U.S. tries to penetrate the Iraqi leadership. Cruise missiles have been launched from long range by the U.S. Navy and for the first time by British submarines. But officials say the so-called shock and awe, that is the beginning of the all-out assault, has been put on hold. For the second time since last night's so-called decapitation attempt, Saddam Hussein has been shown on state television. Or has he? U.S. officials say there are doubts about whether the video pictures are really those of the Iraqi president. Intelligence experts are analyzing the tapes. Thumbs up from Turkey. After much debate, the parliament today gave U.S. warplanes the okay to fly over that country's airspace en route to targets in Iraq. But the parliament also gave Turkish troops the go-ahead to march into northern Iraq. Now back to Wolf Blitzer in Kuwait. Wolf?
Thanks very much, Connie. Will the United States have to go all out against Iraq? Will the Baghdad regime collapse? Joining me now from Capitol Hill, Senator Evan Bayh. He's a Democrat. He serves on both the Intelligence Committee as well as the Armed Services Committee. Senator Bayh, thanks very much for joining us. I know you're well briefed on these matters. Is Saddam Hussein, as far as you know right now, alive?
Wolf, as far as I know, he is alive. I think we have to operate under that assumption until proven to the contrary.
How good was the information that prompted President Bush yesterday to give the order to launch that Tomahawk cruise missile strike against that Iraqi leadership position in Baghdad, presumably including Saddam Hussein?
Well, Wolf, as you know, we can't get into too many specifics, but suffice it to say, I don't think the President would have authorized the strike unless there was a high deal of confidence in the information that he was provided.
Do you know what the damage was? Who was killed? I'm told earlier in the day that that important elements of the Iraqi leadership were in fact in that building and probably were killed, but I'm wondering if you have any updated information.
Wolf, I don't. We were scheduled to have a CIA briefing at 3 o'clock today, but the agency had to postpone that. They said they weren't ready. We have a classified armed services briefing this evening at 6:30, so perhaps we'll know more later on about the assessment of exactly who was taken out in that strike.
Are you surprised, Senator Bayh, like I am, that shock and awe, huge bombardment that we had all been bracing for has been delayed? At least it hasn't started yet. There are these relatively limited strikes yesterday and today against various targets in and around Baghdad.
Wolf, I am, and I can only speculate as to why that is. Perhaps we've had reports that a number of Iraqi units may be willing to capitulate fairly quickly. Perhaps we're giving them a little more time to do that before they are destroyed. Perhaps we're showing that we're serious about taking out Saddam, and in so doing encouraging further intelligence sources to come forward to let us know where he is so we can take him down. But to answer your question directly, I am surprised. I think that it's on the way, though, if we don't get the kind of results we want from these limited attacks.
When you say it's on the way, Senator Bayh, when do you anticipate that the full fury of the U.S. military might be unleashed?
Wolf, that I don't know. That's a closely held secret by the Pentagon, and if I did, I probably couldn't tell you here on international television. However, I think what's going on here, Wolf, is that we have good intelligence that a number of Iraqi units are willing to put down their arms. I assume that we're giving them an opportunity to do that before we go in and kill people needlessly. At what point the military decides, I think part of this, frankly, is going to depend upon the active resistance that we encounter. To the extent that the resistance stiffens, then I assume we'll go all out and do what we have to do to make sure that our men and women are protected. And that means shock, awe, and everything else we can throw at them.
Senator Evan Bayh is a Democrat, but he's been supportive of President Bush throughout this showdown with Iraq, now a war with Iraq. Senator Evan Bayh, thanks for joining us tonight. Let's get a little bit more analysis now on what may or may not have happened to the Iraqi leadership, including Saddam Hussein. Our national security correspondent David Ensor is joining us now live from Washington. I know you've been checking in thoroughly, David, with all your sources. What's the latest assessment on what was achieved, if anything, during that initial blast against Iraqi leadership positions in Baghdad?
Well, Wolf, they do believe they hit some of the Iraqi leadership, but on the question of whether Saddam Hussein was hit or not and whether these tapes are really him or not, there's quite a debate going in this town. I will tell you that most recently, in recent hours, U.S. officials are starting to say they do believe he's still alive.
U.S. officials are increasingly convinced this is indeed Saddam Hussein, not a body double as some first suggested. Officials say technical analysis suggests the voice and inflection and movements of the mouth may be the same as Saddam Hussein from past tapes, though there is not yet a definitive U.S. judgment.
There's debate about that.
One skeptic about whether it is Saddam is former CIA photo analyst Dino Brugioni, though in the past, he told CNN, Saddam's doubles almost never speak.
Saddam has got one, possibly two doubles. And when his double appears, you watch it. He'll never talk.
CIA Director George Tenet was able to report to the president that intelligence officials believe the cruise missile and bomb attacks that started the war did kill some top Iraqi leaders, who U.S. officials say were sleeping in the compound that was attacked, but not, apparently, Saddam Hussein.
This is a guy who moves quickly, who covers his movements, who uses body doubles, he uses multiple motorcades going in different directions to fool anybody who might want to take him out. There are a lot of tunnels and there are a lot of underground bunkers underneath the palaces and elsewhere that he can avail himself of.
Some say it may take an insider to put an end to Saddam Hussein.
There's greater chance that somebody will kill him than he will come out and say, I surrender. And it is possible that somebody will turn on him.
Finding just one person can be quite a challenge. After all, the U.S. has been looking for a 6'4" Arab and a one-eyed Afghan leader for well over a year now. Wolf?
David Ensor with the latest on that. David, thanks very much. CNN's Bob Franken, he's embedded with U.S. military forces in northern Kuwait as well. He's joining us now live. Bob, tell us where, you don't have to tell us exactly where you are, but give us a rough estimate where you are, what you're seeing and doing right now.
Well, what I'm hearing right now, and you're probably hearing too, is the sound of a jet, an A-10 taking off. A-10s are anti-tank planes, and their purpose is to, quote, prepare the battlefield. It's part of the effort. We've been hearing that term. They are very potent anti-tank weapons, and their mission, as it's described to us, is to go out there and take out any tanks that might be in the way of U.S. troops. Now, what has not happened here is any intensifying of the air traffic here, and that would be consistent with the reports that things thus far have not really gotten off the ground. You'll have to forgive the pun, but that this is still in a very, very low-key mode, low-key as it can be when you consider the fact that this is considered preparatory to an all-out war. Now, one of the things that has happened here today, as it's happened, is Kuwait City. There have been any number of alerts about possible chemical or some sort of what they call NBC, nuclear, biological, or chemical warfare. Each time it's happened, everybody has to drop what he's doing and put on all his anti-gear, all the kind of stuff that's supposed to protect us. And by the way, the sirens start while we're on the air. I want everybody to just realize that none of these reports has turned into anything but false alarms. It's been the case all day for obvious reasons, with the tensions as high as they are in the world. Tensions are very high on this base. Wolf?
But even with all those false alarms, the troops where you are, Bob, can't afford to let their guard down even once.
Oh, they're not given much chance to do that. Every single time that the alarms go off, everybody is required to put on all of his gear. They call it a MOP 4, which is military mission-oriented protective posture. It's one of those military terms, and they have 4 levels. 4 is the one that says an attack is on the way or imminent. That is what they've immediately ratcheted up to. Then, after it's over, they go down to a MOP 1, which is where you can be dressed like I am right now.
Bob Franken, he's far from home in northern Kuwait. We'll be checking in with you often. Thanks very much, Bob. I want to check in with Nick Robertson. He's also far from home. He's in Baghdad right now, watching, listening, trying to assess what's going on. We're showing our viewers live pictures. It seems like it's fairly quiet right now, Nick.
Wolf, very quiet indeed. The roads are empty. The stars are out in the sky above. Very few clouds at this time. And looking out across the city, very, very, very quiet. That ministry building that bore the brunt of several strikes earlier, still smoldering, smoke coming out from the base of that building just across the river from where I am. But very quiet at this time, Wolf. Certainly, it is an eerie sense. However, at the same time as being quiet in this city, expecting a very heavy bombardment to come. They don't know when, but they do expect it to come. The lights all on this city, the street lights, the lights in many of the buildings, in the apartments close to where we are in the suburbs. I'm looking out, good visibility now, looking out towards the suburbs, maybe 10, 12 miles off in the distance. All the lights on there, the lights on the bridges across the river, all on, the lights along the side of the river, all on here, Wolf.
There's nothing that mandates, Nick, the U.S. military from only launching these kinds of missiles and precision-guided bombs at night. They can do it during the day. Many of our viewers probably remember during the first Gulf War, a cruise missile flying over Baghdad during daytime hours, very visible. The Iraqis trying to shoot down those cruise missiles. Do Iraqis differentiate between nighttime and daytime as far as the threat level that they perceive?
I think certainly they feel the threat is greater at nighttime. They certainly know that their capabilities probably do not match in terms of night vision, do not match the capabilities of coalition forces at this time. That is, however, having said that, the level of security on the streets here seems perhaps slightly higher during the day than it is at nighttime, but it does seem to be the nighttime that they fear the most. The streets are at their emptiest end. During the daytime, some limited, very limited traffic about, but people perhaps lulled into a false sense of security, thinking because it's daytime, nothing will happen. Indeed, I suppose if one were to analyze what happened this particular day, and it would be foolish to think the other days that follow should be a model for this, But indeed, the daylight hours here on this day, no big impacts in this city, no big attacks in this city during the daylight hours. So perhaps for Iraqis, they may get the impression that therefore the days are somewhat safer, Wolf.
Nick Robertson in Baghdad. Nick, thanks very much for that report. We'll be checking back with you often. The start of the war, of course, hasn't done anything to dampen protests in the United States against military action or rallies in support of it, for that matter. CNN's Maria Hinojosa is in New York. She's at Times Square. She's following the latest developments on that front. Maria?
Well, Wolf, even this horrible weather has not daunted the fact that hundreds, if not thousands of people have now poured into Times Square. There are feeder marches coming in from, it looks like, so many different streets all across Manhattan. I ran into a group of high schoolers that were coming from downtown, members of the Union Theological Seminary that were coming from uptown, publishing executives who were coming from midtown. They are all coming here. It's hard to tell because there's really no one place for them to congregate. So they're kind of really just moving around Times Square. The police have now moved in with lots of vans, lots of horses, telling them that they're going to be arrested if they block traffic. So I'm suspecting that sooner or later we will be seeing some arrests here in New York City. Now, across the country, many similar actions. We know that in Boston, many of the students poured out of the universities and campuses, and they were marching across the Charles River. In Washington, D.C., starting very early in the morning, there were people who were gathering at the White House and in other areas of Washington, D.C., kneeling in prayer in some acts of civil disobedience. And in San Francisco, there was a plan to stop business as usual. And so many of the protesters, thousands of which came out to the streets, but many of them decided to go into civil disobedience. They were chaining themselves to bike racks, and they were going to literally have to be sawed off from those bike racks. Now, on the other side, of course, there were many others who decided that they needed to come out and support this war, not just support the troops, which many of the anti-war demonstrators say they also do, but these demonstrators wanted to come out and say that they are supporting this war, that they believe that this is the correct action that the president has taken, and they want President Bush to know so. Now, many different people, though, had a lot of different feelings about what this war has meant to them. Let's hear from some of them.
What happened to Osama bin Laden? You know, last year we were chasing down Osama bin Laden. We still don't have him, so now we shift our focus to Saddam Hussein.
I'd say kind of mixed feelings. I mean, you know, we're sending people to die in some respect, and then in some respect it's a necessary evil. I mean, it has to be done.
Regardless of my views on the president, I support our troops, and God bless them over there, and best of luck in whatever goes on.
Now, many of the anti-war organizations say that they have activities planned across the country tonight in small towns like Birmingham, Alabama, and South Bend, Indiana. And some anti-war groups have actually decided that the position they're going to take is by sending letters to the troops. That's Win Without War, that's asking their constituents to write letters to the troops to tell them that they support them even though they're against this war. Wolf?
CNN's Maria Hinojosa in Times Square, New York. Thanks very much, Maria. There have been protests around the world today against the U.S.-led strike on Iraq. In Egypt, hundreds of people clashed with police as demonstrators tried to get to the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. It was a similar scene in South Korea, where thousands of anti-war demonstrators protested near the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. They demanded the South Korean government withdraw its support for the U.S. effort to oust Saddam Hussein. And in Rome, flag-waving protesters blocked the city center. Demonstrations also were held in other major Italian cities, and the country's 3 major labor unions have called for a strike. Iraq was on the agenda today as the European Union's annual spring summit began in Belgium. Leaders of 15 European governments will be meeting through tomorrow. The Reuters news agency reports they're discussing a draft resolution that would warn Iraq's neighbors to, quote, refrain from actions that could lead to further instability. And I was just quoting. Reuters also says the resolution is aimed at discouraging a Turkish incursion into Iraq. The U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division has a key role in the war. The 101st is known as the Screaming Eagles. It's based at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. CNN's David Mattingly has been talking with family members of the soldiers, and he joins us now live. David?
Thanks, Wolf. No official word out of the 101st Airborne today here at Fort Campbell, but the unofficial order of the day for everyone involved here seems to be to keep going. Stay occupied, keep busy with your jobs, your family, your friends, your children, anything to keep occupied so that you are not overwhelmed by the events of the day. And we found some soldiers from the 101st taking that unofficial order to heart today. They are all female members of the 101st, and they share a special bond because their husbands have been deployed overseas. They could not be deployed with them because they are all pregnant. So they are now gathering together, sharing this common experience that they have, and trying to work through the many layers of emotions that they are now going through.
As a soldier, I wish I was there. As a wife, I'm really worried about my husband. And as a mom, I hope that's all over before my baby's born.
I'm scared because my husband's over there, but I also know it's our job, so it's something we train for all the time. So you just, I don't know, I'm a wife, so it's hard, but you know, I'm also a soldier, so you just have to watch it and just hope everything's going all right over there.
And there are all appearances of business as usual here, at least as business as usual as it has been since the troops deployed back in late February. Right now, the headline at the local paper here is that the 101st is ready for assault. The soldiers I talked to before deployment saying they were very anxious to make their mark, make their history in this particular conflict. Everyone, of course, waiting for some kind of word of what the 101st is doing, some evidence of that is going on. We have some video to show you of the local post office. Normally there has been lines out the door at this post office for people lining up often an hour at a time to ship packages off to their loved ones in the Persian Gulf. Today the lines are very small, suggesting that people are staying at home, glued to the TVs, looking for some kind of information. Wolf?
CNN's David Mattingly with important story back home. Thanks very much, David Mattingly, for that report. And as David just said, this is a very difficult time for military families, and perhaps hardest for the children of the men and women taking part in Operation Iraqi Freedom, some of whom have not seen their parents in months.
It's just really hard knowing that he's not here every night, that I can't go up to him and just give him a kiss whenever I want to.
Sad moments after last night's coalition airstrikes. Iraqi television presented what it said was a message from the president, Saddam Hussein. There's some speculation that the man who appeared on television was perhaps an imposter disguised to look as Saddam Hussein. We're joined now by Graham Fuller. He's a former vice chairman of the National Intelligence Council at the CIA. Graham, we're showing these live pictures of Baghdad as we speak. But what do you make of that speculation that perhaps that wasn't really Saddam Hussein after all?
Well, it's a very fascinating possibility. If Saddam was taken out last night, nobody knows whether he was or not, then obviously the Iraqi regime would want to reassure the public by giving the impression that Saddam and other people around him were alive. On the other hand, if Iraqis have a great deal greater familiarity with Saddam Hussein and his voice and style than we do, so if there was any indication to the public that this actually wasn't Saddam Hussein, what kind of a message does that send? Is the message for Washington, or is it for the folks back home?
Very interesting. What do you make now of the top Iraqi leadership having now sustained these two separate air attacks yesterday and today against key targets in Baghdad? Do you sense that they are at all being rattled right now?
Well, they've been through a lot of this before. I mean, we've not only the war in '91, but many other subsequent strikes on Iraq. So in one sense, they're fairly battle-hardened, and I think they may be more optimistic based on the past than they should be this time around. On the other hand, obviously, it's a daunting moment if you know that this is when the U.S. is really coming for you, and that's the name of this particular game. So I think there's probably a great deal of anxiety. The other thing, of course, is how much they want to decentralize control of the military. So one of the problems Saddam faces, if he wants to avoid detection by any means of intelligence, then he cannot really be engaged in a lot of communications with commanders or with other people which really means a lot of his commanders have to be on automatic pilot to some extent. That changes the situation.
Graham, you've studied Iraq for many, many years. Do you believe, by and large, the Iraqi soldiers will fight or fold?
Well, if that's a tough question, let me put it this way. As long as there is reasonable belief that Saddam is alive and in control, you're probably going to have to fight, because if you don't, Saddam will kill you. I think the minute that there is a sense that Saddam is gone or totally out of touch or can't get you, and nor can his commanders immediately over you, that they can't or won't get at you either, then that's the time to break. But you know, that's a tough call, and your life depends on how you make that decision.
As you know, U.S. and British troops have already crossed the line. They're in southern Iraq right now, where the Shia are the dominant population. The expectation is that they will be receptive to the U.S. and British troops coming in. But is that a fair assumption?
I think it is a fair assumption, Wolf, that the Shiites of southern Iraq, who loathe Saddam Hussein, that have been on the receiving end of some of the worst of the oppression and who have been systematically excluded from governance in Iraq for decades, they have little regard for Saddam. Again, though, there's the problem of when do you jump? When can you be sure that the regime, the local security officials and military cannot punish you if you decide to jump ship and then go with the Americans? So I think that's going to be the critical question, is to try to persuade these people that the danger for them is now past and they can safely join up with the West at no danger to themselves.
Graham Fuller, the former vice chairman of the National Intelligence Council of the CIA, has an important new book coming out next month, The Future of Political Islam. We'll be looking forward to that book. Graham, thanks very much for joining us. With the air and ground war underway right now, security in the United States continues, even at this moment, to be stepped up. CNN's Greg Clarkin is over at New York's LaGuardia Airport. Tell us what's happening there, Greg.
Hi there, Wolf. We've been here all day, and up and down these terminal halls, we've seen a number of National Guardsmen, usually moving about in pairs of 2 or 3 rifles over their shoulders. Also, a heavy presence from the Port Authority Police Department K-9 unit. So it's a lot of post-9/11 measures that appear to be beefed up today, especially. A lot of, again, the measures that we've seen over the last year and a half, but today definitely much in evidence. Back here on the wall, the monitors for the flights, really not a lot of change in terms of schedules for the domestic U.S. carriers. They're pretty much sticking to their schedules in terms of the U.S. flights. But we have seen a lot of European, a lot of overseas and international airlines canceling flights. Now, as far as the domestic situation goes, the major airlines say at this point they're sticking with their schedule, but they do hold out the possibility that they're taking things on a minute-to-minute basis, and at some point they may have to cancel some flights if this war were to go on for any prolonged period. Back over here we have the American ticketing area, and we've spoken to a number of travelers today, and again, these we should point out are domestic travelers, but really to a person we found that these folks are not changing their plans. They're very encouraged by the security measures here, and for the most part they're saying they're going about with business as usual, and again, that to a person that we've spoken to today, not a lot of change in their plans. Wolf, back to you.
All right, thanks very much, Greg, at LaGuardia Airport in New York City. Meanwhile, the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld says as many as 4 oil wells may already be burning along Iraq's border with Kuwait, bringing to mind the environmental disaster, of course, that followed the first Persian Gulf War. CNN's Ed Lavandera is in Houston, Texas, with more on the people whose job it is to put out these kinds of fires. Ed? Unfortunately, we don't have Ed. We'll try to pick him up later and get his report. I want to show our viewers these live pictures of Baghdad right now. It's eerily quiet in Baghdad, as our Nick Robertson has been reporting now for the past couple hours. It wasn't very quiet earlier in the evening as U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles and other bombs hit selected targets in the Iraqi capital. We don't have any kind of full bomb damage assessment, but certainly we're going to continue to watch what's happening in Baghdad. We're going to continue to watch all of these developments. I'll continue to be here in Kuwait City. I'm Wolf Blitzer. Let's go to CNN's Connie Chung now for all the late developments. Connie?
Thanks, Wolf. Here's what's happening at this hour in the strike against Iraq. Coalition forces attacked Baghdad again today. A bombardment of cruise missiles launched from U.S. ships and submarines in the Red Sea and Persian Gulf. The missiles hit several government buildings, setting them on fire. The British were in on the attack, 2 submarines also firing missiles at Iraq for the first time. Pentagon sources say the so-called shock and awe phase of the massive bombardment is being put on hold for now. U.S. troops from the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force crossed into Iraq from Kuwait today after Iraqi artillery took aim at U.S. and British positions in Kuwait. The U.S. 7th Cavalry fought with Iraqi soldiers after nightfall there. Army sources say a number of Iraqi military vehicles were destroyed. Casualty reports right now are not available. President Bush thanked the armed forces for their service today. The president said the military campaign is designed to make the world more peaceful. He said more than 40 countries have now backed the military action against Iraq. British Prime Minister Tony Blair said just an hour ago that British troops are now engaged in combat on land, sea, and air. U.S. officials are becoming convinced that it was in fact Saddam Hussein who appeared on the Iraqi TV last night after the initial U.S. strike on Baghdad. Analysis of the voice and appearance increasingly argues against an early theory that a double of Iraqi leader was used. The FBI says to be on the lookout for this man, Adnan el-Shukri Juma. Sources tell CNN that recovered al-Qaeda documents refer to the 27-year-old Saudi, saying he could possibly carry out a suicide attack in the U.S. or against American interests abroad. He's been in the U.S. in the past, but his current whereabouts are unknown. And that's the latest from the CNN Center. I'm Connie Chung. I'll be back in a half an hour. And now to Lou Dobbs' Moneyline.